Hey there. Tonight, let your body settle gently into stillness, as if the day has slowly folded itself away. The noise of the world has softened now, and all that remains is a quiet voice, steady and calm, ready to guide you through a true story that unfolded far beneath the surface of the earth. This is not a story that rushes forward or demands your attention with force. It is a story that moves slowly, like a deep breath, carried on patience, hope, and the quiet strength of ordinary lives. As you listen, there is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. Simply rest and allow the story to unfold at its own gentle pace. Far above the deep places of stone and darkness, the land of northern Chile stretches wide and dry beneath an endless sky. The desert here is ancient and still, shaped by wind and sun over countless years. Life in this land has always required endurance, and those who live here learn early how to listen to the earth, how to respect it, and how to work alongside its quiet power. In small towns scattered across this vast region, families rise before dawn, sharing simple meals, preparing for long days, and carrying with them the unspoken knowledge that the land provides, but never easily. Mining has long been part of this rhythm of life. It is not spoken of with romance or prideful drama, but with calm acceptance. Mining is work that asks much from the body and the spirit, and those who choose it often do so because it is familiar, because it offers stability, or because it is what their fathers and grandfathers did before them. Each morning, miners descend into the earth with measured steps, guided by routine and trust. They know the tunnels, the sounds of stone, the steady hum of machines. They know that beneath the surface, time moves differently, slower and heavier, wrapped in shadow. Among these miners were men whose lives were shaped by quiet persistence. They were sons, fathers, brothers, and friends. Some were young and still learning the rhythms of the underground world, while others carried years of experience in their hands and shoulders. They shared stories during breaks, spoke of families waiting at home, and returned each evening with dust on their clothes and tiredness in their bones. None of them expected their work to become known beyond their small communities. None of them imagined that one ordinary day would stretch into a long passage of waiting beneath the earth. The mine they worked in rested beneath dry hills, its entrance modest and unremarkable. It did not announce danger or promise disaster. It simply existed, as it had for years, offering work and routine to those who entered. On that day, the air felt no different than usual. The sounds were familiar, the tasks ordinary. The miners moved deeper into the tunnels, following the steady patterns that had guided them countless times before. There was no warning carried on the air, no sense of the moment about to change everything. When the earth shifted, it did so without drama or intention. Stone gave way to stone, and the mine, which had always felt solid and dependable, rearranged itself in silence and force. In a single breath of time, pathways were closed, light disappeared, and the known world narrowed into darkness. The sound of collapse echoed briefly, then faded, leaving behind a heavy stillness. Dust hung in the air, settling slowly, as if the earth itself were catching its breath. In that moment, there was confusion, but not panic. The men checked on one another, their voices low and steady. They moved carefully, guided by touch and memory. They searched for familiar paths, for openings that had always been there. But the mine no longer answered as it once had. The way forward was gone, replaced by walls of stone that did not move or yield. The underground world had become sealed, quiet, and closed. As minutes passed and stretched into something longer, understanding settled slowly. The miners realized they were trapped, held deep within the earth with no clear way out. Above them lay layers of rock and time, separating them from sunlight, wind, and the simple sounds of daily life. Yet even then there was no shouting, no wild fear. What emerged instead was a calm awareness shaped by experience and necessity. Underground, survival depends on clear thinking and steady breath. They gathered together, sharing what they had. Food was counted gently, water measured with care. There was no rush in these movements, only quiet agreement and mutual respect. Each man understood that what happened next would not be decided by speed or strength, but by patience and unity. In the darkness they spoke softly, conserving energy and calm. The earth pressed in around them, but they did not push back with anger. They waited. Above ground, life continued for a brief while, unaware of the stillness below. The desert wind moved across the hills, and the sky remained wide and blue. Families expected familiar returns, unaware that the hours were quietly passing without word. When concern finally rose and questions were asked, the truth began to surface slowly, like a distant echo. The mine had gone silent. The men had not come back. The first response was careful and deliberate. Those responsible for the mine assessed the situation with measured steps. Rescue teams gathered, bringing equipment and experience, but also uncertainty. The earth does not easily reveal what it holds, and every movement must be made with respect. Beneath the surface, the miners could not see what was happening above, but they trusted that efforts would begin. Trust became a quiet companion, shared among them without words. Time underground moves in unusual ways. Without light, the sense of day and night softens, blending into a continuous stretch of waiting. The men marked time through routine, through conversation, through moments of rest. They spoke of their homes, their children, the meals they missed, and the simple comforts of sunlight and open air. These conversations were not filled with longing or sorrow, but with calm remembrance, as if speaking these things helped keep them close. In the stillness, leadership emerged naturally, not through command, but through presence. Some men focused on organization, others on morale, others simply on listening. Each role mattered. The underground space became not just a place of confinement, but a shared shelter, shaped by cooperation. The earth above remained unmoved, but within that space, a quiet order formed taste. As the first days passed, hope remained gentle and steady. There was no expectation of quick rescue, only faith in effort and time. The men rested when they could, conserving strength. They moved carefully, conserving light. Every action was deliberate, shaped by the understanding that survival was a long conversation with patience. Above ground, the realization of the situation deepened. News traveled outward from the desert, carried by concern and quiet urgency. Families gathered, waiting with calm courage, holding on to one another under open skies. They did not shout or demand, but trusted the process unfolding. The desert watched silently, unchanged, as human care and determination began their slow work. Back underground, the men settled into the reality of waiting. They spoke of the earth as if it were a living thing, something to be respected rather than feared. They knew its weight, its silence, its power. They also knew themselves and the strength that comes from shared purpose. In the dark, fear did not disappear, but it softened, transformed into watchfulness and care. This was the beginning of a long journey, one not marked by sudden turns or dramatic moments, but by quiet endurance. The story of these miners would not be shaped by noise or haste, but by the slow passage of time, by trust in one another, and by the steady belief that even deep beneath the earth, life continues to move forward, breath by breath, moment by moment. The quiet underground continued to hold its breath as the men settled more deeply into the reality that had wrapped itself around them. With no clear edge between day and night, time softened into something gentle and wide, like a slow river moving without sound. The darkness was no longer sudden or sharp, but familiar, resting calmly around their shoulders. In that stillness, the miners learned to listen in new ways, to the rhythm of their own breathing, to the small sounds of movement, and to the silence that followed. Nothing pressed them to hurry. The earth above remained patient, and so they learned to be patient too. They spoke quietly, their voices steady and low, careful not to waste energy or stir fear. Each word mattered, not because it carried urgency, but because it carried comfort. They shared memories of mornings before work, of children still half asleep, of warm cups held in tired hands. These memories were not painful, they were soft, like familiar songs remembered without sound. In telling them, the men reminded one another of who they were beyond the darkness, beyond the stone, beyond the moment they were living through together. Food became a gentle concern, not a source of panic, but a matter of careful thought. What they had was modest, and it was shared without argument or hesitation. Each portion was passed calmly, measured not only by need, but by fairness. Hunger arrived quietly and was met with patience. Water, more precious still, was treated with respect, sipped slowly, valued deeply. The act of sharing itself became a kind of nourishment, strengthening something inside them that no tunnel collapse could touch. Leadership did not announce itself with raised voices or firm commands. It appeared naturally, shaped by trust and experience. Some men spoke with clarity, offering plans and reassurance. Others listened closely, absorbing the mood of the group and responding with calm presence. There was no single voice guiding them, but many voices moving together, like a chorus spoken in whispers. Decisions were made slowly, thoughtfully, with care for every person present. The mine, once a place of routine labor, became a shelter shaped by human intention. The walls of stone did not change, but the space between them felt different now, filled with cooperation and quiet purpose. The men arranged themselves in ways that allowed rest, that preserved warmth, that offered a sense of order. Even in the darkness, they created structure, not from control, but from care. Above them, far beyond the reach of their voices, concern had taken root and begun to grow. The absence of the miners was felt first as a quiet unease, then as a heavy understanding. Families waited, first with patience, then with gathering worry, and finally with a steady resolve to remain close. The desert became a place of still watching, where tents rose gently against the sky, and people stood together, sharing silence as much as words. Rescue efforts unfolded carefully, guided by knowledge and respect for the earth. The ground was studied, measured, and approached with caution. Machines hummed softly, drills turned with patience, and every movement was considered. There was no rushing the land, no forcing it to yield. Those above understood that the same earth that held the miners also protected them, and every action needed balance and care. Down below, the miners could not see or hear these efforts. What they had instead was trust. Trust that they had been noticed. Trust that people were working for them. Trust that time, though slow, was moving in their favor. This trust was not loud or dramatic. It rested quietly among them, as natural as breath. As hours blended into long stretches of waiting, the miners learned to rest in new ways. Sleep came gently and went softly, without clear boundaries. Dreams drifted in and out, shaped by memory and hope. When they woke, they did so calmly, orienting themselves through touch and familiar voices. No one was ever truly alone. Even in sleep, there was a sense of shared presence, of bodies resting close together in mutual awareness. Conversations turned inward at times, reflecting on life choices, on paths taken, on the meaning of work and family. These reflections were not heavy or filled with regret. They were quiet acknowledgments of the journey each man had taken to arrive at this moment. There was acceptance in these thoughts, and a gentle gratitude for the lives waiting above, unchanged by the darkness below. The mine itself seemed to listen. Sounds carried differently now, every small movement echoing softly through stone. The men became careful observers of these sounds, learning which were familiar and which were new. They learned the language of the underground silence, understanding when it spoke of stability and when it hinted at change. This listening became another form of patience, another way to remain connected to the world around them. Above ground, messages of hope spread slowly outward. People who had never met the miners spoke their names, thought of their families, and waited with them in spirit. The story was no longer confined to a single place beneath the desert. It had become something shared, held gently by many hearts, each one contributing quiet strength. The desert nights above were cool and clear, filled with stars that seemed to watch silently. Families gathered beneath those stars, holding on to routine, cooking meals, speaking softly, and resting when they could. They did not give in to despair. Instead, they allowed hope to remain steady and calm, trusting the long work unfolding beneath their feet. Down below, the miners continued their careful routines. They cleaned their space as best they could, maintaining dignity and order. Even small acts of care mattered. A shared laugh rose now and then, soft and brief, reminding them that life still moved within them. These moments did not break the calm, they deepened it, grounding them in humanity. The sense of waiting became less about rescue and more about endurance, not because hope had faded, but because living fully in each moment was necessary. The men focused on what they could control, their thoughts, their actions, their care for one another. This focus became a steady anchor, keeping fear from growing too large. As time continued its slow passage, something subtle shifted. The darkness no longer felt like an enemy. It became a companion, constant and quiet. The earth, heavy and unmoving, felt less like a barrier and more like a shelter holding them in place until the moment of change arrived. This shift did not happen all at once. It grew gently, shaped by patience and shared experience. Every voice mattered, every presence counted. The group became a single rhythm, breathing together, thinking together, resting together. Individual worries softened into collective strength. No one carried their burden alone. In this shared space, resilience grew not from struggle, but from calm connection. Above, the work continued, steady and deliberate. Each day brought small progress, measured not in speed, but in care. Those guiding the rescue understood that success would not come from force, but from listening to the land, from patience, and from respect for the lives held beneath. Down below, the miners could not know or hear these efforts. What they had was trust. Trust that they had been noticed. Trust that people were working for them. Trust that time, though slow, was moving in their favor. This trust was not loud or dramatic. It rested quietly among them, as natural as breath. As the day stretched beyond counting, the miners learned to rest in new ways. Sleep came calmly and went calmly, without clear boundaries. Memories became present. Familiar faces appeared in the darkness, speaking with gentle voices. This deep rest was not a form of escape. It was a way of managing energy, a way of holding on to the core of who they were. Above ground, the work continued, steady and deliberate. Each day brought small progress, measured not in speed, but in care. Those guiding the rescue understood that success would not come from force, but from listening to the land, from patience, and from respect for the lives held beneath. Down below, the miners remained unaware of details, but deeply aware of purpose. They believed in the unseen hands working for them.
That belief did not demand proof. It rested quietly, like a promise held without words. They spoke of the future gently, not as something guaranteed, but as something possible. Possibility was enough.
Deep beneath the desert, the sense of time continued to soften, stretching and folding in gentle ways that no longer followed the world above. The miners moved within this quiet rhythm with growing familiarity, as if their bodies and thoughts had learned a new language shaped by darkness and patience. There was no sudden change, no sharp moment when hope arrived or fear departed. Instead, everything evolved slowly, like a long breath drawn carefully and released with calm intention. The men began to notice how their minds adapted to the stillness. Thoughts that once raced now drifted gently, settling where they wished. Worry still appeared, but it did not take control. It passed through like a cloud, acknowledged and then allowed to move on. In its place, a quieter awareness grew, an understanding that the present moment was enough to focus on. Each small action, each shared word became a way to stay grounded and calm. They spoke often of simple things, the sound of footsteps on gravel, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the taste of familiar meals. These memories were not clung to with desperation, they were visited like old friends, welcomed and then released. In remembering the surface world, the miners kept it close without letting it overwhelm them. The balance they found was gentle and steady, shaped by necessity and care. In the shared space, routines grew more defined. Rest followed activity, and activity followed rest, even without clocks or light. The body, wise in its own way, found patterns to follow. Hunger signaled softly, thirst whispered rather than demanded. Fatigue arrived like a quiet suggestion instead of a command. The men listened to these signals with respect, honoring their limits and supporting one another when strength waned. Some spoke more than others, and some preferred silence, but all were accepted equally. There was no pressure to fill the darkness with sound. Silence itself became comforting, a shared presence rather than an absence. When words did come, they were chosen with care, shaped to soothe rather than stir. Laughter appeared now and then, low and warm, reminding them that joy could exist even here, even now. Above ground, the desert held its own rhythm. Days passed beneath the sun, and nights unfolded beneath wide skies filled with stars. The camp that had formed grew more settled, not in size, but in spirit. People learned one another's faces, voices, and quiet habits. They shared food, stories, and long hours of waiting. Hope did not shout from this place, it sat quietly, wrapped in patience and trust. The rescue teams continued their careful work, guided by knowledge and respect for the earth. Each movement was thoughtful, measured against risk and possibility. They listened to the land, studied its layers, and adjusted their approach as needed. Progress was slow, but it was steady. Those above understood that true care often moves quietly, unseen and uncelebrated. Below, the miners remained unaware of the details, yet deeply connected to the effort through belief. They spoke of the people above with gratitude, imagining their careful hands and steady minds. This connection, though unseen, felt real and present. It bridged the distance between darkness and light, reminding the men that they were not forgotten, not abandoned, not alone. As days blended together, the men began to reflect more deeply on the nature of waiting. Waiting, they realized, was not empty time. It was filled with choices, thoughts, and quiet acts of care. It was something they could shape moment by moment. By choosing calm over fear, cooperation over conflict, and patience over despair, they transformed waiting into something meaningful. The earth around them remained still, heavy, and unyielding, yet it no longer felt hostile. It felt ancient and indifferent, neither cruel nor kind. The miners accepted this truth without bitterness. The earth simply was, and within it they were learning to be still too, to move with its pace rather than against it. There were moments when fatigue settled deeply, when bodies ached and spirits felt thin. In those moments, the group drew closer, offering quiet words, gentle reassurance, or simple presence. No one was expected to carry more than they could. Strength was shared, passed gently from one person to another, like a steady flame protected from wind. Some spoke of faith, others of family, others of nothing at all. All of it was welcome. There was no single way to find comfort, no single path to resilience. Each person brought their own source of calm, and together these sources formed a wide and steady foundation beneath them. Above, messages of support continued to ripple outward, crossing borders and reaching distant places. People who would never step into the desert or descend into a mine began to hold the story quietly in their thoughts. This unseen network of care grew without noise, adding weight to the hope held above and below. In the darkness, the miners rested more easily now. Sleep, though still light and broken, came with less tension. Dreams softened, filled less with urgency and more with familiar scenes. Waking no longer brought confusion, but gentle awareness. The voices around them grounded them quickly, reminding them where they were and who they were with. As time moved on, a subtle shift took place in how the men spoke of the future. It was no longer distant or uncertain. It was discussed calmly, in simple terms, as something that would arrive in its own time. There were no bold predictions or desperate promises, just quiet acknowledgement that life beyond the mine still existed, waiting patiently, just as they were. This growing sense of calm did not mean the situation had become easy. It meant the men had grown into it. They had learned to live within uncertainty, without being consumed by it. This learning was slow, shaped by hours of stillness and shared endurance, and it became one of the quiet strengths that carried them forward. The underground world remained calm and hushed, but within that stillness, attention sharpened in quiet ways. The men listened not only to one another now, but to the earth itself, to the subtle hints carried through vibration and sound. Every shift of weight, every distant echo was noticed, gently, without alarm. The mine had taught them patience, and patience had taught them how to listen. In the darkness, the idea of connection began to feel closer, though nothing visible had yet changed. The miners spoke softly about the possibility of contact, not as a demand or expectation, but as a quiet thought shared among them. They knew the work above would take time. They trusted that when something happened, it would happen slowly, carefully, and with purpose. This trust rested like a warm layer around them, easing the long hours of waiting. Their routines continued with calm consistency. They checked on one another, offered support where it was needed, and rested when the body asked for rest. There was dignity in these small acts, a sense that even here, even now, life deserved care. The men took pride in remaining thoughtful and kind, even when circumstances offered little comfort. This kindness was not dramatic, it was simple, steady, and deeply human. Above ground, careful listening was happening too. Machines were positioned with precision, guided by maps and calculations shaped by experience. Each movement was deliberate, shaped by the understanding that beneath the surface, lives waited in silence. Those working above felt the weight of that responsibility, and they carried it with calm focus rather than urgency. The desert watched quietly as patience guided every decision. Then, one day beneath the earth, a sound arrived that felt different. It was faint and distant, barely more than a suggestion carried through stone. The men paused, their bodies still, their breath quiet. They did not rush toward the sound or call out in excitement. They simply listened, allowing the moment to settle. The sound returned again, gentle and rhythmic, unlike the natural movements of the mine they had come to know. Hope stirred softly, not as a surge, but as a gentle warming. The men exchanged quiet words, confirming what each had heard. There was no shouting, no sudden movement. Calm held its place, even as the possibility of contact grew clearer. The earth, which had long felt closed and unresponsive, seemed now to be answering in its own slow language. As the sound continued, understanding formed gradually. Something was reaching toward them from above, guided by patient hands and careful planning. The miners did not celebrate or cry out. They remained steady, aware that this was only one step in a long process. Still, the presence of that sound changed the space around them. The darkness felt less distant from the world above, less sealed, less final. They spoke softly about what this might mean, keeping their expectations gentle and grounded. No one allowed excitement to rise too quickly. They knew the earth would move at its own pace, and they respected that rhythm. Hope once again took a quiet form, settling among them without disturbing the calm they had built. Above, those guiding the work noticed signs that suggested their efforts were moving closer to their goal. They adjusted their approach with care, responding to the land rather than forcing it. Communication moved slowly between teams, shared through calm discussion and thoughtful listening. Every decision was shaped by the understanding that the smallest mistake could carry great cost. Below, the men prepared themselves not with action, but with patience. They conserved energy, rested when possible, and kept their minds clear. The idea of connection did not lead them to rush forward. Instead, it reminded them to remain steady, to trust the process unfolding beyond their sight. As time passed, the sound grew clearer, more consistent. The miners listened together, counting its rhythm not with numbers, but with breath and awareness. The mine, once silent, now carried this new presence gently through its walls. The men spoke of it as if it were a visitor approaching slowly, respectfully, knocking softly rather than breaking in. This change brought new conversations, quieter still than before. The men spoke of gratitude, of relief, of the careful hands working above. They spoke of families waiting under the desert sky, of voices they hoped to hear again. These thoughts were shared calmly, without strain, as if speaking them aloud made them more real while still keeping them safe. The earth continued to hold them, but it no longer felt entirely closed. It felt like something that could be opened, slowly and thoughtfully, through cooperation between those above and those below. This shared effort, though unseen by the miners, was felt deeply, strengthening their calm resolve. Rest came more easily now. Sleep, though still light, carried a new softness. Dreams were touched by the idea of movement, of passage, of change that would come gently rather than suddenly. Waking brought awareness without fear, grounded by the steady presence of others and the quiet sound that returned again and again through stone. The sound that moved through the stone did not hurry, and neither did the men who listened to it. It arrived softly, returned gently, and settled into the underground space like a steady pulse. With each quiet vibration, the miners felt a growing sense of connection, not loud or overwhelming, but warm and reassuring. The darkness around them remained unchanged, yet it no longer felt complete. Something new now shared the space with them, something that came from beyond the stone. They spoke of the sound with calm curiosity, describing what each of them sensed, careful not to let imagination run ahead of reality. There was comfort in speaking together, in shaping understanding slowly and thoughtfully. The men reminded one another to remain patient, to remember that this was only a beginning. The earth, after all, moves on its own time, and every step forward must be earned with care. Above ground, the desert continued its quiet watch as the work progressed with steady focus. Those guiding the effort listened closely to the land, adjusting their movements in response to its subtle signals. There was no room for force or haste. Every action was guided by respect, not only for the stone, but for the lives waiting below. The desert air carried no sense of urgency, only purpose. Below, the miners prepared themselves for the possibility of contact with gentle awareness. They rested more deliberately, conserving strength, keeping their minds clear. There was no rush to act, no sudden surge of excitement. Hope, once again, took its place calmly, resting beside patience rather than replacing it. The men had learned that calm was not the absence of feeling, but the way to carry feeling without being overwhelmed. When the sound grew closer, more defined, the men noticed subtle changes in the air, small shifts that spoke of movement beyond their reach. They listened carefully, standing or sitting still, letting the moment unfold without interference. No one spoke loudly, no one moved suddenly. The space felt full, charged with quiet attention, as if the mine itself were listening alongside them. Then, gently, something new appeared where there had only been stone. A small opening emerged slowly, carefully, shaped by patient hands working from far above. It did not arrive with noise or force, it arrived with care. The miners watched in calm stillness as this narrow passage took form, connecting their underground world to the one beyond. There was no cheering, no shouting, no sudden release of emotion. Instead, a deep quiet settled, heavier and more meaningful than before. The men understood what this moment represented, but they also understood that it was not the end, it was a beginning, a single thread woven carefully through layers of stone, carrying possibility without promise. Through this small opening, the miners sent a simple message, shaped with care and clarity. They did not use many words. They did not waste energy or emotion. They communicated what mattered, calmly and directly, trusting that the message would be received with the same care with which it was sent. In that moment, the distance between above and below felt smaller, bridged by patience and shared purpose. Above, the message was received with quiet relief. There were no sudden celebrations, only careful acknowledgement. Those working above understood the responsibility carried by this connection. It was a lifeline, fragile and precious, and it would need to be protected and strengthened with steady hands and clear minds. The desert remained still, holding space for the work ahead. Back underground, the miners returned gently to their routines, now shaped by this new presence. The opening did not change their behavior dramatically. It did not break their calm. Instead, it became part of the rhythm they had built, a reminder that their waiting was seen, that their patience had meaning. Food and water, still limited, were managed with the same care as before. Nothing was taken for granted. Each small delivery, when it came, was received quietly, with gratitude rather than excitement. The men understood that sustainability mattered more than speed. Survival was a long conversation, and every careful choice contributed to its success. Conversations shifted slightly now, touched by reassurance rather than uncertainty. The men spoke of the work ahead with gentle realism, aware that time would still be needed. They did not rush their thoughts toward the surface. They remained grounded where they were, focused on the present moment, trusting the path unfolding slowly before them. Sleep deepened, carried by the knowledge that connection had been made. Dreams softened, filled with images of movement and transition rather than confinement. Waking brought a sense of steadiness rather than longing. The earth still held them,
but now it felt more like a passage than a barrier. Above, plans were shaped carefully, guided by the new understanding gained through contact. Those leading the effort remained calm, focused on safety and care above all else. The world watched quietly, learning to match the pace of the work rather than demanding speed. Patience spread outward, becoming a shared practice rather than a private one.
With the small opening now linking the underground space to the world above, life beneath the earth settled into a new and steady rhythm. The miners did not rush to change who they had become during their long waiting. Instead, they allowed this connection to fold gently into their days, becoming part of the calm routine they had carefully built. The darkness remained, the stone walls unchanged, but the feeling of isolation softened, replaced by a quiet sense of being held within a larger effort. Each message that traveled through the narrow passage was shaped with care. Words were chosen slowly, meant to inform rather than stir emotion. The men spoke honestly about their condition, their needs, and their strength without exaggeration or fear. In return, they received calm reassurance, thoughtful guidance, and steady presence. Communication became a gentle exchange, never hurried, never overwhelming, always respectful of the fragile line that connected them. The arrival of small supplies brought relief without excitement. Food and water were shared as they always had been, evenly and thoughtfully. Nothing disrupted the sense of balance they had learned to protect. Each meal, though modest, was received with gratitude and patience. Eating became not just an act of survival, but a moment of shared calm, a reminder that care was reaching them through stone and distance. The men continued to watch over one another, noticing changes in mood or strength with quiet attention. When someone felt tired or uneasy, others stepped closer, offering rest, reassurance, or simple presence. There was no sense of hierarchy in this care. Everyone gave and received as needed. The underground space felt less like a place of confinement and more like a shared shelter shaped by trust. Above ground, the rescue teams adjusted their work with steady focus. The connection they had made allowed them to listen more closely to those below, shaping plans with greater understanding. There was no rush to finish, no pressure to force progress. Safety remained the guiding principle, and every step forward was measured against the well-being of the men waiting patiently underground. The desert above remained quiet, its vast openness contrasting gently with the close space below. Families continued to wait with calm resolve, learning to live within uncertainty without letting it take over. They shared stories, meals, and moments of rest, supporting one another in small, steady ways. Their patience mirrored that of the men below, creating a shared rhythm that spanned the distance between earth and sky. Down below, the miners found that their inner world had changed. Fear no longer visited as often, and when it did, it passed quickly, softened by routine and connection. Hope was no longer something imagined in the distance. It was present in each exchange, each careful delivery, each quiet assurance. Yet it remained gentle, never demanding attention, never disturbing the calm. They spent time reflecting on what they had learned in the darkness. Many spoke of how silence had taught them to listen, how waiting had taught them to notice small details, and how dependence on one another had deepened their sense of care. These reflections were shared without drama, as simple truths discovered slowly over time. Sleep continued to improve, shaped by growing stability. The men rested more deeply, waking with less confusion and more clarity. Dreams carried images of movement and transition, but they remained soft, never urgent. Waking brought the familiar sounds of breath and quiet voices, grounding them once more in the shared space of the underground shelter. The earth around them remained still and heavy, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt neutral, ancient, a part of the story rather than an obstacle. The miners accepted its presence fully, no longer pushing against it in thought or feeling. Acceptance brought peace, and peace allowed strength to renew itself quietly. Above, the careful planning for the next stages of the rescue continued. Specialists worked together, sharing knowledge and listening closely to one another. There was respect not only for the land, but for the human process unfolding. No one claimed credit, no one sought attention. The focus remained on care, patience, and the quiet task of bringing people home safely. The story of the miners, now known beyond the desert, continued to be held gently by many. People followed the progress with calm interest rather than urgency, learning to wait alongside those directly involved. The world, in its own way, learned a lesson in patience, guided by the steady example unfolding beneath the earth. The days beneath the earth continued to unfold with a gentle sameness that no longer felt heavy or uncertain. Waiting had taken on a shape the men could recognize and live within, something steady and familiar rather than empty or frightening. Each moment arrived calmly, passed softly, and made room for the next. The darkness remained, but it no longer defined the space. The miners themselves had become the defining presence, shaping the underground world through care and quiet resolve. Conversations flowed slowly now, often drifting into silence without effort. No one felt the need to fill every moment with sound. Silence had become a shared comfort, a place where thoughts could rest without pressure. When words came, they carried warmth and intention, often focused on simple reflections about life, family, and the meaning found in small acts of kindness. These talks were never long or intense. They unfolded gently, like a quiet stream moving through still air. The men remained attentive to their bodies and minds, noticing small changes and responding with care. Fatigue was met with rest. Worry was met with reassurance. No feeling was ignored, yet none were allowed to grow too large. This balance had been learned slowly, through shared experience and mutual trust. It was not something taught, but something grown naturally in the darkness. Above ground, the work continued with the same careful rhythm. Each day brought progress measured not in speed, but in confidence and precision. Those guiding the rescue understood that rushing could undo what patience had built. They moved forward step by step, guided by both science and empathy, holding the lives below with quiet respect. Families at the surface continued to wait with calm strength. They found comfort in routine, in shared meals, in gentle conversation beneath the wide desert sky. Though worry still lived within them, it did not dominate their days. Hope remained present, steady and grounded, shaped by trust in the careful hands at work and the resilience of the men below. Down in the mine, the miners noticed how their sense of self had shifted. They were no longer just individuals waiting to be rescued. They were a community, shaped by shared time and shared care. Each person mattered deeply, not for what they could do, but for who they were. This sense of belonging offered a quiet strength that held them steady through long stretches of stillness. The small opening that connected them to the world above continued to serve as a gentle reminder of progress. It was not a focus of constant attention, but a reassuring presence, quietly affirming that the waiting had purpose. Messages traveled slowly, thoughtfully, never overwhelming. Each exchange reinforced a sense of being supported, seen, and remembered. The earth itself seemed to respond to the calm. Sounds remained predictable, familiar, no longer startling. The men understood the language of the mine now, recognizing which noises were natural and which carried meaning. This understanding eased their minds, allowing them to rest more fully within the space. Reflections grew deeper as time passed.
Some men spoke of lessons learned, of how stillness had revealed thoughts they had never had time to notice before. Others simply listened, absorbing these insights quietly. There was no pressure to agree or respond. Each reflection was accepted as part of the shared human experience unfolding in the dark. Sleep became a place of renewal rather than escape. The men rested knowing they were safe, supported, and connected. Dreams were calm, often filled with familiar faces and gentle landscapes. Waking brought a sense of grounding, a return to the shared space where patience continued to guide every action. Above, the world continued to follow the story with quiet attention. It became less about urgency and more about endurance, less about rescue and more about care. People learned to slow their expectations, matching the pace set by the careful work beneath the desert. In doing so, they became part of the same rhythm that held the miners steady. The underground space, once defined by uncertainty, now felt like a place of learning and transformation. The men did not romanticize their situation, nor did they dwell on hardship. They simply lived within it, responding to each moment with calm presence. This acceptance did not weaken them, it strengthened them quietly, preparing them for the changes still to come.
Beneath the calm surface of waiting, a gentle sense of readiness began to form. It did not arrive suddenly or loudly, but grew slowly, like a quiet understanding shared without words. The miners sensed that the time of stillness, though not yet complete, was beginning to shift towards something new. This awareness did not disturb their calm. Instead, it added a soft layer of focus, shaping their thoughts with care and patience. Messages from above began to carry subtle guidance, offered gently and without pressure. The men were encouraged to prepare their bodies and minds in simple ways, to rest when possible, to remain steady and attentive. These messages were not commands, they were suggestions, shaped by understanding and respect. The miners received them with calm trust, knowing that each small step mattered. They began to notice their bodies more closely, paying attention to how they felt in the quiet underground air. Movement was slow and careful, designed to maintain strength rather than test limits. Rest remained central, and no one was asked to do more than they could. Preparation, they learned, was not about effort, but about balance. Conversations turned gently toward the idea of change. The men spoke softly about what it might feel like to move again, to feel air shift, to sense the world opening. These thoughts were shared without excitement or fear. They were held carefully, like fragile objects, acknowledged and then set down until the time was right. Above ground, the careful work continued with increased attention. The path forward was shaped through thoughtful collaboration, guided by safety and care. Each decision was made slowly, considering both the physical journey and the emotional experience of those waiting below. The goal was not only to bring the men out, but to do so gently, with respect for everything they had endured. Families above felt the shift too, though it was expressed quietly. They sensed movement in the waiting, a change in the air of the camp. They responded by holding one another closer, by speaking softly, by preparing themselves emotionally for what lay ahead. There was no rushing toward celebration, there was only careful readiness, shaped by love and patience. Down below, the miners supported one another through this new phase. They checked in gently, offering reassurance and presence. If worry appeared, it was met with calm conversation. If fatigue surfaced, it was met with rest. The sense of community they had built remained strong, guiding them as the shape of waiting began to change. The earth around them remained still, but the men felt less held by it and more accompanied by it. The stone no longer felt like a barrier to overcome, but part of a journey nearing its next chapter. This perspective softened the idea of ascent, framing it not as escape, but as transition. Sleep remained important, and the men honored it with care. They rested deeply when they could, understanding that rest itself was preparation. Dreams sometimes carried images of movement and light, but these images remained gentle, never overwhelming. Waking brought calm awareness rather than anticipation. Above, the rescue teams continued to refine their plans, testing systems and rehearsing steps with focus and patience. They understood that success would come not from speed, but from steadiness. Each detail mattered, and each was treated with respect. The lives they worked to bring home were never far from their thoughts. The story, now followed by many, was held with similar care. People learned to wait with intention, to trust the process unfolding. The pace set by the miners and rescuers became a quiet lesson, reminding the world that some journeys cannot be hurried without harm. In the calm underground space, the sense of preparation slowly began to turn into gentle action. Nothing happened all at once, and nothing felt sudden. The miners moved forward with the same patience that had carried them through the long stillness. Each new step was approached carefully, shaped by trust in the people above and in one another. The quiet they had learned to live within remained, steady and reassuring. Guidance continued to arrive through the narrow connection, offered in soft, steady words. The men listened closely, absorbing each suggestion with care. They were encouraged to remain calm, to breathe evenly, and to let their bodies respond naturally. There was no pressure to perform, no demand for strength beyond what they already carried. Everything was designed to feel safe, familiar, and unhurried. The miners supported one another through these first movements of change. They spoke gently, checking in with quiet questions and reassuring answers. No one was left to wonder alone. The community they had built beneath the earth remained their strongest guide, holding them steady as the idea of ascent became more real. The underground space felt different now, though its walls and shadows remained the same. The presence of possibility softened the darkness, making it feel less closed, less final. The men noticed how their thoughts shifted, no longer circling only around waiting, but gently reaching toward movement. Even so, they did not rush their minds ahead of their bodies. They stayed grounded in the present, honoring each moment as it came. Above ground, careful steps were taken to begin the slow process of bringing the miners closer to the surface. Every action was measured, guided by safety and care. Those involved moved with quiet focus, aware that the emotional journey mattered as much as the physical one. They worked not only to lift bodies, but to protect the calm that had been so carefully built below. Families waited with steady hearts, sensing that change was near, but refusing to let anticipation overwhelm them. They spoke softly, rested when they could, and held on to routine as a source of strength. Their patience mirrored that of the men below, forming an unspoken bond that stretched through layers of stone and time. Down in the mine, the miners began to imagine the path upward in simple terms. They did not picture the end in detail. Instead, they focused on the first small movements, the first sensations of change. This approach kept their minds calm and their bodies relaxed. Each breath became an anchor, each shared word a reminder that they were not moving alone. Rest remained gentle and important. Rest was taken seriously, understood as a vital part of the journey ahead. Dreams continued to carry images of light and openness, but these images remained soft and distant, never pulling the men too far ahead of where they were. Waking brought a sense of readiness without tension. The earth around them remained steady, offering no resistance and no assistance. It simply held its place, ancient and quiet. The miners accepted this presence with ease, no longer seeing it as something to overcome, but as part of the path they had walked together. As the idea of ascent grew closer, gratitude flowed gently among the men. They spoke of the care they had received, the patience shown by those above, and the strength they had found in one another. These reflections were not emotional displays, but calm acknowledgments, spoken softly and received with understanding. Above, the world continued to watch quietly, learning to match the pace of the journey. The story had become less about rescue and more about trust, less about urgency and more about care. In this shared waiting, something deeper than relief was taking shape, a respect for the slow and thoughtful way human lives are best protected. The movement toward the surface began not as a dramatic shift, but as a continuation of the calm that had already shaped every moment underground. The miners understood that leaving the depths would require the same patience that had sustained them there. Nothing about the process invited urgency. Instead, it called for trust, stillness, and a steady presence within each breath. Each man prepared in his own quiet way, guided gently by messages from above and by the shared understanding within the group. They focused on remaining relaxed, allowing their bodies to respond naturally. There was no sense of being pulled forward or pushed upward. The journey was approached as something to be experienced slowly, one careful moment at a time. The underground space felt almost tender now, holding the men in the final phase of their long stay. The stone walls, once unfamiliar and heavy, had become known and predictable. Leaving them did not feel like escape, but like a gentle farewell. The men acknowledged this feeling without sadness, recognizing that every part of the journey had shaped them in ways that would remain. Above ground, the work unfolded with quiet precision. Those guiding the ascent paid close attention to every detail, adjusting slowly, listening constantly. Their focus remained on the well-being of each individual, honoring the physical and emotional care required for such a transition. Nothing was rushed, nothing was assumed, every movement was deliberate. Families waited with calm anticipation, holding their breath not in tension but in careful hope. They understood that this moment, long awaited, still required patience. Their trust rested in the steadiness of the process and in the strength of the men below. They allowed themselves to feel ready without demanding speed. Down below, the miners remained connected to one another through quiet words and shared presence. They spoke gently, offering reassurance and grounding one another in the present. The idea of ascent, once distant, was now close enough to feel, yet it remained soft, never overwhelming. They stayed rooted in calm, letting readiness grow naturally. The earth continued to hold its place, unchanged and silent. The miners moved within it with respect, aware that the path upward passed through the same stone that had sheltered them. This awareness brought a sense of continuity rather than separation. The journey was not about leaving something behind, but about moving through it. Rest remained essential. The men honored the need for sleep and stillness, understanding that strength came from care rather than effort. Dreams softened further, often blending the underground calm with distant impressions of openness and light. Waking brought clarity and reassurance, grounded in the shared presence of others. Above, the rescue teams remained focused and steady, communicating clearly and calmly. Their voices carried reassurance rather than instruction, trust rather than command. The men below received this guidance with ease, responding in ways that felt natural and unforced. As the process continued, gratitude remained a quiet companion. The miners reflected on the care they had received, the patience that had carried them through long days and nights, and the strength found in simple human connection. These reflections did not distract them from the present. They grounded them, reminding them of the values that had sustained them. The world beyond the desert continued to watch with quiet respect, learning to appreciate the slow unfolding of a journey shaped by care. The story had become a lesson in how calm, patience, and shared responsibility could guide even the most challenging paths. The first sensations of the outside world approached slowly, carrying with them a gentle awareness that the long underground days were beginning to shift toward something new. The miners moved carefully, each small motion deliberate and calm, guided by trust in the hands above and the steady rhythm they had cultivated among themselves. Nothing about this moment demanded haste. Everything encouraged stillness, careful observation, and a quiet openness to what lay ahead. Each man took time to notice his body, feeling how muscles that had rested for so long responded to the small changes in posture and movement. Breathing became a soft anchor, steadying the mind and body alike. There was no rush to reach the surface. Each moment of ascent was experienced fully, with awareness and gentle attention. The rhythm of shared patience flowed steadily, threading each miner to the others as they moved together. The opening above had been widened slowly, with hands and machines working in harmony with the land. Each adjustment was made thoughtfully, considering safety and comfort as much as distance or speed. From below, the miners could sense this care, even if they did not see it. The gentle vibration, the subtle shifts, and the soft hum of activity all spoke of a world that was mindful of their presence, not hurried by expectation. Conversations remained soft, anchored in reality, yet touched with hope. The miners spoke quietly of what they might feel once sunlight reached their eyes, not with longing, but with curiosity. They reflected on the days spent beneath the earth, sharing observations about endurance, patience, and the quiet lessons learned from the long stillness. These words did not rush the moment, they honored it. Above ground, families gathered beneath the desert sky, sensing each small progress. Their eyes followed the work with calm attention. Their voices remained steady as they shared thoughts and reassurances among one another. Though excitement whispered beneath the surface, they allowed patience to guide their experience, learning from the slow, deliberate pace set by those working in tandem with the miners below. The earth, patient and vast, seemed to hold the moment with them. The stone that had been both shelter and barrier now became a pathway, supporting each careful movement upward. The miners noticed this subtle shift not as force but as continuity, an understanding that the journey from darkness to light required respect for every layer of the path. Sleep became less necessary as awareness grew, yet rest still held its place, calming minds and steadying bodies for each next step. Even as the miners grew closer to the surface, dreams remained gentle, merging memories of the quiet underground with images of openness, sky, and warmth. Waking brought a calm clarity, a readiness for what was approaching without being rushed or anxious. The first glimmers of light reached into the mind slowly, filtered and gentle. It did not burst in with sudden brilliance, but arrived as a soft presence,
touching stone, then air, then skin. The miners noticed the difference without surprise, greeting it quietly, like a familiar guest returning after a long absence. No shouting or sudden movement disturbed the space. The light was received with steady eyes and calm hearts. Each step toward this gentle illumination was accompanied by reassurance from one another and from the distant voices above. The miners remained grounded, aware of the careful hands guiding them and the patient effort that made this moment possible. Trust, cultivated over long days of waiting, carried them steadily, strengthening both body and mind. Above, those orchestrating the rescue moved with equal calm, ensuring that each approach respected the rhythm and readiness of the men below. Every decision was made in quiet focus, with attention to detail, recognizing the fragility and strength entwined in each motion. There was no need for haste. There was only the careful unfolding of what had been nurtured through patience and care.
The journey from darkness to light continued with deliberate calm, each moment unfolding like a quiet breath. The miners moved slowly, feeling the stone beneath their hands and the gentle pull of the outside world above. There was no rush, no urgency, only a steady awareness of each motion and each breath. The long days below had taught them patience, and that patience now guided the first movements toward freedom. The soft light filtering into the mind did not overwhelm the senses. It arrived gradually, touching stone, then faces, then hands, warming and reassuring without startling. The miners noticed it quietly, allowing themselves to feel its presence without expectation. It was neither sudden nor dramatic. It simply was, a companion in the final stretch of the journey they had begun so long ago. Communication remained gentle and purposeful. Words traveled through the narrow passageway, exchanged with care and simplicity. The men confirmed their readiness, shared small observations, and offered quiet reassurances to one another. Each message was received with patience and gratitude. Nothing rushed the process. Each word helped guide movement with calm attention and mutual trust. Above, the work continued with measured precision. Machines and hands worked in harmony, guided by careful calculations and unwavering focus. Each adjustment, each motion was performed with respect for both the path and the lives it carried. The desert remained still, the vastness above a quiet witness to the unfolding human effort below. Families waited with tempered anticipation, leaning on patience to hold them steady. Each small update was received with quiet gratitude. They spoke softly among themselves, holding on to routines and gentle acts of care. The rhythm of calm that had been built between underground and surface now extended to the waiting world, connecting hearts and minds across the distance. The miners' bodies moved with awareness. Every muscle, every joint remembered the long stillness and now adjusted to new rhythms with care. No sudden motions disturbed the calm. Each movement was intentional, designed to preserve strength, ensure comfort, and maintain steadiness. The journey upward was not a sprint, but a series of mindful steps, each one taken with awareness and calm. Rest remained part of the routine even in the final stage of the ascent. Moments of pause allowed the men to recover, to breathe fully, and to remain present in each step. Sleep, when it came, was brief but deep, carrying the body and mind gently forward. Dreams reflected fragments of light and air, soft images of openness and warmth that blended seamlessly with the steady underground world they were leaving behind. The earth, patient as ever, seemed to guide them with subtle cues. Stone shifted with care, Vibrations softened, and the opening above expanded gradually. This quiet assistance was never dramatic, it was simply the natural movement of the path, unfolding in harmony with the careful attention of those above. The miners felt it as part of the rhythm they had learned to trust. As they neared the surface, gratitude deepened quietly. They spoke softly of the care they had received, the patience they had practiced, and the strength they had found in one another. These reflections were not loud declarations, but gentle acknowledgments, grounding them in the present and guiding them through the final steps of their ascent. Above ground, the first clear signs of arrival were met with calm focus. Rescue teams remained attentive, ensuring each movement respected the readiness of those beneath. The world beyond the desert continued to watch, learning the value of patience, trust, and careful effort. Nothing in this moment demanded haste. Everything moved in measured harmony, carrying the men gently from the darkness to the soft light above. The miners' hands reached the edges of the opening slowly, deliberately, each movement a careful negotiation between body and space. The stone around them no longer felt like confinement, but like a protective frame, guiding their ascent without resistance. They did not hurry. There was no need. Every breath, every adjustment was taken with steady awareness. The quiet patience of the long underground days remained, accompanying them as they approached the threshold of light. The first warm touch of air on their faces was soft and reassuring. It carried scents of the desert, dry and faintly sweet, brushing against skin that had known only the cooler, denser atmosphere below. The miners paused, feeling the gentle difference, allowing their senses to register the world beyond without overwhelming their focus. There was a subtle, calming rhythm to the moment, a steady heartbeat that matched the care with which they had been guided upward. They spoke quietly to one another, words shaped by relief and gratitude, yet tempered by the calm that had been cultivated over many days. There was no shouting or exuberance. Each exchange was deliberate, acknowledging the journey, the effort, and the patience that had made this moment possible. It was a shared reflection, a quiet celebration of endurance and resilience. Above, the desert seemed to hold its breath, vast and still beneath a wide sky. Rescue teams adjusted their focus carefully, helping each miner navigate the opening with gentle guidance. Every movement was deliberate, respecting both the physical and emotional readiness of the men. Nothing was hurried. Everything was measured, ensuring that the final steps from darkness to light were safe and comforting. Families waited not with frantic anticipation, but with steady hope. Each small sign of progress was absorbed with quiet joy. Conversations were soft, filled with gentle reassurances and mindful patience. They had learned the rhythm of waiting alongside those below, their hearts attuned to the slow unfolding of each careful action. This shared understanding, born of long days and careful planning, shaped the calm that now surrounded the approaching reunion. The miners' bodies adjusted gradually to the light and warmth above. Movements were slow, deliberate, and guided by awareness. Every step was felt fully, and every breath was noticed as a measure of presence and readiness. The earth beneath them remained a steady companion, its weight transforming from constraint into a platform that had guided them safely toward the surface. Sleep had become less necessary now, but moments of rest were still cherished. Dreams reflected fragments of the underground, the slow rhythm of waiting, and the soft light that had begun to reach them. Waking brought clarity and focus, each miner centered on the careful steps that led from shadow into open air. The calm strength developed over long days now served as a quiet anchor for their final approach. Messages continued to travel, exchanged slowly and thoughtfully. Words of reassurance, guidance, and encouragement were received with gratitude and calm acceptance. Each exchange reinforced trust, not just in those above, but in themselves and in the rhythm of the journey they had undertaken. It was a conversation that moved gently, like a steady stream, carrying patience and hope along its course. As the miners neared the final threshold, the world above and below seemed to align in quiet harmony. There was no rush to cross. Each person took the moment fully, honoring the long path they had traveled. Light and air embraced them gently, offering warmth without urgency, presence without intrusion. The earth, the sky, the people above, and the bonds forged underground all held together in a quiet, steady balance. The miners emerged slowly, each step a testament to patience, resilience, and the careful nurturing of calm strength. It was not a sudden release, but a soft unfolding, a gentle arrival that honored the journey in every detail. The moment above ground stretched gently, as if the sky itself were aware of the quiet significance of the miners' emergence. Each step into open air was measured, deliberate, carried with the calm patience that had defined the long days below. The light wrapped around them softly, warming skin that had known only shadow and stone. It was not overwhelming, it was welcoming, steady, and full of gentle reassurance. They paused often, allowing themselves to feel the difference between the air underground and the desert breeze that touched their faces. Every inhalation carried the soft scent of dry earth and the faint warmth of sunlight. There was no rush to move forward. Each miner acknowledged the air, the sky, and the space around them with quiet gratitude, savoring each sensation as part of a transition that had been carefully nurtured over many days. Voices, soft and supportive, came from above. Rescue teams guided each movement with gentle instructions, their tone calm and consistent. There was no urgency, only careful observation and steady encouragement. Each miner responded with awareness, placing trust in the hands above while relying on the patience they had developed below. The ascent, so long in preparation, unfolded as a quiet dance between care and movement. Families, standing beneath the expansive desert sky, watched with calm hearts. They had waited patiently, understanding the slow rhythm of progress that had been established. Now they breathed alongside their loved ones, holding space for each step without rushing or forcing the moment. Their presence added warmth and grounding to the gentle unfolding of the reunion. The miners moved with awareness, every muscle and joint adjusting gradually to the change in gravity and environment. Movements were deliberate, measured, and full of intention. There was no haste, no sudden energy. Each small adjustment honored the body's needs and the care that had guided them from darkness into light. It was a movement shaped as much by trust and attention as by strength. Rest remained important even now. Though close to the surface, the men continued to pause when necessary, to sit, to breathe, and to absorb the world that had been distant for so long. Sleep had become lighter, more restorative, providing the calm clarity needed for each careful step. Dreams were imbued with fragments of light, air, and gentle openness, weaving together underground patience with surface freedom. Messages continued to travel softly, exchanged between miners, rescuers, and families. Words of reassurance, observation, and gratitude were offered without urgency, received without strain. Each communication reinforced the trust and understanding that had been cultivated over weeks of patient waiting. The rhythm of conversation was slow, deliberate, and steady, as deliberate as the steps that carried them toward full emergence. The earth itself, once a silent and unyielding presence, now seemed to breathe alongside them. Stone, air, and sky existed in harmony, forming a gentle continuum between underground and surface. The miners sensed the transition not as a sudden break, but as a natural unfolding, a continuum of care, patience, and quiet strength that had guided them safely through the darkness. As each miner reached fully into open air, the world welcomed them with soft light, warmth, and a calm presence. There was no shouting, no sudden celebration, only the quiet acknowledgement of a journey completed with dignity, a slow and mindful transition that reflected the patience, care, and resilience woven throughout every day below. The miners' feet now rested fully on solid ground, the cool desert soil beneath them a welcome contrast to the stone and dust that had defined their underground world. They did not move quickly. There was no sudden rush toward celebration, no frantic gestures of relief. Each person remained steady, allowing the shift from confinement to openness to unfold gently, honoring the patience that had carried them through so many quiet days. Above, family members approached slowly, voices softened, steps measured. There was no frantic clamor, only the careful, mindful presence of loved ones meeting the miners at the threshold of freedom. Hugs were extended with gentle care, arms wrapped around one another without force or hurry. Tears, if they came, were quiet and thoughtful, expressions of deep gratitude rather than sudden release. Every movement, every touch was deliberate, filled with the understanding of what had been endured. The desert sky stretched wide above, still and vast, holding space for the moment without intrusion. The sun cast a soft light across faces, bodies, and stone, bathing everyone in calm warmth. No one needed to rush. No one needed to demand more. The rhythm of the past weeks had shaped a tempo of patience that carried into the reunion itself, turning what could have been chaos into a measured, soothing ceremony of return. The miners adjusted to the new environment gradually, muscles stiff from long confinement stretched with careful awareness. Breathing deepened, lungs filling with air that was lighter and freer than any they had known underground. The world above was not overwhelming. It was full of quiet textures, gentle colors, and soft sounds that welcomed them with calm curiosity. Each sensory detail was absorbed slowly, savored, and understood as part of the transition. Conversations were quiet, reflective. Words were spoken to acknowledge the journey, to share gratitude, and to express relief without dramatization. There were no loud exclamations, no hurried recounting of events. Instead, there was thoughtful communication, a gentle weaving together of experience, memory, and presence. Each voice contributed to the calm rhythm, reinforcing the sense of trust and mutual care that had grown beneath the earth. Families and rescuers moved together in the same gentle cadence. They did not force the miners forward. They did not demand hurried explanations or immediate emotion. They simply held space, guiding the men with quiet attention and steady hands. Every action respected the slow unfolding of awareness, the delicate balance between relief and the calm strength built over so many days. Even in this moment of arrival, the miners reflected quietly on the lessons of the underground. Patience, attentiveness, trust, and care were not merely survival strategies. They had become part of the fabric of their being. Each step, each breath, each soft word spoken during the reunion echoed the practices they had cultivated, revealing the depth of the transformation that had occurred during the long, steady wait beneath the earth. Sleep now returned naturally, unpressured, without urgency. The miners rested deeply, bodies and minds absorbing the gentle rhythms of the world above. Dreams blended light and air, open skies and soft winds with fragments of the underground, creating a seamless continuity of experience that carried forward the calm patience of the past weeks. Above, the desert held a quiet witness to the reunion. The world, watching from afar, felt the power of deliberate care and mindful patience. No sudden chaos, no frantic urgency dominated the moment. Instead, a shared human understanding, cultivated over the long days underground and above, created a gentle harmony that encompassed every presence. The miners now stood fully in the open, the long underground days behind them, yet the lessons of that quiet world remained embedded in their every movement and thought. The desert around them stretched endlessly, warm and still, a soft canvas upon which the final chapter of their journey unfolded. There was no rush to fill the space with noise or celebration. Instead, each moment was held gently, like a quiet exhale after weeks of patient breathing. Families lingered close, sharing soft words, slow smiles, and steady embraces. The intensity of waiting had transformed into a calm understanding. Joy, gratitude, and relief did not rush to the surface all at once. They arrived gradually, measured and thoughtful, allowing every person to meet the experience with the awareness and calm cultivated during the long days below. Every touch, every glance carried the weight of endurance, the acknowledgement of the slow passage of time, and the quiet triumph of patience. The miners moved gently through the space around them, noticing textures, temperatures, and light in ways that were new yet familiar. Stone underfoot, the whisper of the wind, the subtle warmth of the sun, all were observed with mindfulness. There was no hurry to explore, no desire to rush toward the lives they had temporarily left behind. Instead, every step was an act of conscious awareness, an extension of the calm and steady discipline that had guided them through the days beneath the earth. Conversations flowed softly, words spoken with intention rather than haste. Stories were shared in fragments, reflective rather than dramatic. Each voice spoke to honor the journey, to acknowledge what had been endured, and to recognize the care and patience that had brought them to this point. Laughter, when it came, was quiet and gentle, a tender acknowledgement of survival rather than loud celebration.
Above, the rescuers and helpers moved with the same measured rhythm, guiding remaining procedures and observing the miners' adjustment with careful attention. Every action was deliberate, shaped by the understanding that the physical release from the mine was only one part of a larger transition. Emotional, mental, and physical recovery were equally important, and every step was approached with calm patience. Sleep returned naturally to the miners, unpressured and restorative. Their dreams carried fragments of the underground, dark stone, close quarters, soft voices of companions, interwoven with gentle impressions of light, sky, and warmth. The blending of these experiences reinforced a sense of continuity and calm, allowing the mind and body to integrate the passage from confinement into openness with ease. The desert itself seemed to hold the world in a quiet embrace. Vast, silent, and patient, it mirrored the steady presence that had guided the miners through their underground days. There was a sense of connection between stone, sky, and human endurance, a continuum of care and awareness that stretched from the depths of the mine to the wide horizon above. Reflection deepened with every calm moment. The miners and those who had awaited them considered not only the survival of body, but the resilience of spirit. They saw how patience, attentiveness, trust, and care had not merely carried them through difficulty, but had shaped them into a quiet community of endurance. This understanding did not demand expression. It simply existed, steady, like the earth beneath and the sky above. As the final chapter closes, allow your thoughts to rest in this calm and reflective space. The miners have returned to air, light, and open sky, yet they carry the lessons of patience, care, and quiet resilience with them. The story does not end with clamor or urgency. It ends gently, thoughtfully, leaving space for reflection, gratitude, and the peaceful understanding of a journey completed with dignity, calm, and mindful awareness. Let your mind linger here, in the soft presence of survival, patience, and human connection. The long story of darkness, waiting, and careful movement has reached its conclusion, not with drama, but with quiet grace. A reminder that the deepest strength is often the calmest, and that journeys endured with care carry their lessons gently into all the days that follow.